Big Bill Anderson here at the Pioneer Cemetery in Prescott, Arizona. Here for two special women of the Old West. One, I'm here at the grave of Sharlot Hall. Quite fascinating lady, and perhaps without her, we might not have had all the history preserved that we do today, because she had the vision back in the 1800s, the late 1800s, to open a museum and start saving mining equipment, memories of Old West pioneers that traveled through Arizona, Indian relics, that sort of thing. And I'm going to tell you more about her story. She was quite fascinating. She was born on October 27th, 1870, and she died on April 9th, 1943. There is a museum here in Prescott. I'll visit that another time, named for her, the Sharlot Hall Museum. When she was alive, it was not named for her. But this is a woman that preserved so much of the Old West here in Arizona. And she is in her family plot here. You can see just how absolutely beautiful this is out here. And I'm going to tell you more about her in the narrative, but I wanted to pay my respects here to Sharlot Hall. And because of men and women like her, with the mentality that they had, they were visionaries, and they saw in the future that the past needed to be preserved. So thank you, Sharlot Hall, and I'll tell you more about her, my friends. This is Big Bill Anderson's Death Tours right here, and stay with me, my friends. Thank you. Sharlot's life work was collecting things that told her the early history of Arizona. She started the Sharlot Hall Museum in Prescott, which today contains extensive collections about the early history of Arizona, as well as a number of historic buildings, including the original governor's house, from which Prescott was the first territorial capital of Arizona in the 1860s. In 1981, Sharlot Hall was one of the first 6 women elected into the Arizona Women's Hall of Fame. Now I'll tell you a little bit more about this fascinating and remarkable woman. Sharlot was an unusual woman for her time, a largely self-educated but highly literate child of the frontier. Born on October 27, 1870, her earliest memories were of Comanche raids, grasshopper plagues, prairie fires, and a pet buffalo killed by wolves. In 1882, the Hall family crossed the Santa Fe Trail and went on to Arizona. She had a fascination with Arizona frontier life and expressed it in poetry. The family settled on Lynx Creek near today's Prescott Valley. It was the final decade of the great western frontier, and its memories stayed with Sharlot. The Hall family raised horses and mined gold at Lynx Creek, then built a homestead that they called Orchard Ranch. James and Adeline, along with their children Charlotte and Ted, kept pigs and cows and grew vegetables, apples, and pears. Sharlot's father, James Hall, worked the hydraulic gold mining operation on Lenox Creek. In 1890, he built a ranch above the junction of the creek with the Agua Fria River and planted fruit trees. Until 1927, Orchard Ranch was Sharlot's home. However, this home was often a burden for Sharlot, as she lived the title of ranch woman. The hardships of ranch life, and particularly of a ranch woman were a frequent theme in her writing. Sharlot attended school for a couple of brief terms in a log and adobe schoolhouse 4 miles from the ranch that she walked to each day. Then boarded in Prescott for 1 year in schooling in town. There she met Harry Fleury, who had come to Prescott in 1864 as secretary to the first governor, John Goodwin, who lived in the old log governor's mansion. The gruff, gray-haired Fleury told Sharlot many fascinating stories of Prescott's early times. Sharlot Hall saw the need to save Arizona's history. The territory had been founded in 1863, and by 1900, as early settlers died and their possessions were lost, along with their stories, there was also widespread looting of Arizona's spectacular Indian ruins to supply the eastern market with Indian relics. To save what she could, Sharlot began to collect both Native American and pioneer material. As early as 1907, Sharlot Hall planned to develop a museum for her collections. In 1906, Sharlot Hall became active in the crusade against the congressional measure, which would have brought New Mexico and Arizona into the Union as one state. Sharlot toured Arizona gathering opposition to the bill and wrote a 64-page article in Out West magazine praising Arizona's resources. Her epic poem, Arizona, describing why Arizona deserves separate statehood, was placed on the desk of each congressman. The measure was defeated, perhaps due in part to Sharlot's efforts. In an age when women were often considered inferior to men, she loved a good fight and broke gender barriers. Sharlot was a free soul, and her writing expresses this sense of freedom. She wrote several books of poetry and life in Arizona. Sharlot served as Arizona's territorial historian from September of 1909 until February of 1912. She was the first woman to hold a salaried office in the territory. During her tenure, she visited prehistoric ruins and Indian reservations and collected pioneer material throughout Arizona. In July of 1911, Sharlot began the longest expedition of her tenure, a 10-week wagon trip across the wild, remote Arizona Strip north of the Grand Canyon. At about this time, she was very active in the national political arena, first as a lobbyist and later as a presidential elector. When Calvin Coolidge won the presidential election of 1925, Sharlot was selected as the elector who would deliver Arizona's 3 electoral votes to Washington. For the trip, the Arizona Industrial Congress commissioned an overdress of copper links, which she wore to the inauguration. Later, Sharlot often wore this unusual garment with its copper accessories and a cactus hat as she lectured about Arizona and its resources. Finally, on June 20th, 1927, Sharlot agreed to move her extensive collection of artifacts and documents into the old governor's mansion and open it as a museum on June 11th the following year. She signed a contract to house these artifacts in Arizona's 1864 governor's mansion and to operate it as a public museum. For the rest of her life, she worked to preserve the old log building and save Arizona's historic past. Sharlot had called her home and business the Old Governor's Mansion Museum, and in the 1930s, with the help of Civil Works Administration, she had the Sharlot Hall building built behind it and began to call the new building the Sharlot Hall Museum. After Sharlot's death in 1943, the entire museum was officially named for her. Her diligent efforts inspired others to contribute to the preservation of early Arizona history. After her death on April 9th, 1943, the Historical Society continued her efforts to build the complex that bears her name today. Sharlot is laid to rest here at Arizona Pioneers Home Cemetery next to her parents and her brother. I felt, as a man that loves Arizona and loves Arizona history so much, that this lady deserved to have a video done about her life. Many people seem to get lost sometimes in history once they're buried, and I wanted to resurrect her name again, at least, so some folks out there in YouTube land can learn a little bit of history and learn what a fascinating lady this was. I know I learned quite a bit as I researched her, and I had heard her name before. So if you like this video, my friends, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you very much for watching, taking time out of your busy day to spend a few minutes with Big Bill Anderson's Death Tours. And I am here at the Arizona Pioneers Home Cemetery saying adios, amigos.